she started crying. And she was like, I just can't do it. And I was like, why? And she's like, I'm just so scared. And I'm like, what? And she's like, the 15%, like, I'm just so scared. I'm too afraid to fail. And I was looking at her and I was like, you already are failing. You're failing because you're too afraid to try.
In this episode, I'm in conversation with Aurora James, the author of the widely acclaimed memoir, Wildflower, the creative director and founder of luxury accessories brand Brother Vellies, the vice chair of the CFDA, and founder of the 15% Pledge, a nonprofit organization that's renowned for promoting equity in the global economy. Founded in 2013, the brand Brother Vellies began with the mission of amplifying traditional African designs and supporting global artisans. In 2020, Aurora established the nonprofit 15% Pledge, advocating for greater diversity in retail commerce. This initiative influenced over 625 companies and garnered support from major brands including Nordstrom, Vogue, InStyle, and Sephora US. Aurora's achievements include being the first Black female designer to receive the CFDA Founders Award. She's also been listed in Time's 100 Most Influential People and was named as Glamour's Woman of the Year in 2022. Let's go ahead and jump in. So welcome, Aurora. I am so excited to be in conversation with you today. I feel like out of all the people that I don't know a lot of people in the fashion industry, but you were certainly one of the most dynamic. And I want to talk about it all today. I want to talk about your business, Brother Vellies. I want to talk about your book, Wildflower, and your nonprofit, 15% Pledge. But let's start from the beginning. So you founded Brother Vellies with the mission of preserving traditional African design techniques and supporting local artisans. So talk to me about the inspiration behind your business and how you got started.
So my mom was adopted at birth, so she didn't know anything about where she came from. This was like a pre-23andMe era. Yeah. And my father was born and raised in Ghana, but he passed away when I was very young. So I didn't really know much about where I came from, and neither did my mom. And so when I was little, we would go to different museums, and she would kind of do everything that she could to seek out information about where she might have come from. And she really exposed me to fashion as like an anthropological exercise. Like she would be like, oh, these are traditional Danish clogs, and they're able to make clogs because they have this kind of tree there and it's a hard enough wood they're able to walk on. And these are the types of patterns that are carved, and women during this time did this kind of carved pattern. And so she would really look for different women's stories through fashion. And she would also always share with me a Nigerian proverb that says, until the lion has a historian, the hunter will always be the hero. And so she would say, you have to seek out women's histories in unexpected places, and fashion is one of the best places to do that. And so when I got into my early 20s and I had a lot of maybe guts in a way that I don't have now, I sort of started backpacking across Africa. And I fell in love with a traditional Southern African shoe called a felskoen, or a vellie for short. And it was kind of one of the very first shoes that originated on the continent of Africa. It was like, you kill the animal, you get the leather, you wrap that around your foot. And then it was 4 pieces of leather tacked together, kind of like a moccasin. And then with the rubber tree, they've said, okay, maybe we can put a rubber sole on this. And when British people came to Southern Africa and they saw the shoe, they fell in love with it. They brought it back up to the UK, they renamed it a desert boot, and they launched the company that you and I know today as Clark's. But that shoe is actually a traditional Southern African shoe. Mm-hmm. And so when I was there and learned about it and then started visiting these workshops that had been making them for many generations that were kind of all dying out, I said, this shoe is really fantastic. The story is so fantastic. Yeah. And I took my entire life savings at the time, which was a windfall of cash, $3,500, mm-hmm. and brought a batch of shoes that I worked on to the Lower East Side and opened a booth.
Wow. You know, it's really interesting because I feel like so much of your creative inspiration comes from travel, mm-hmm. and experiencing different parts of the world and coming up with ideas. And It's interesting because as business people, I feel like travel for creativity or leisure oftentimes gets deprioritized over everything else. So can you talk a little bit about how just the exploration of travel has really helped to sharpen your creativity and vision?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I definitely used to travel for fun, and that was really nice. I've been to a lot of really wonderful places and just got to explore, right? Especially when being a designer was my pretty much primary and sole job. And, it's like Diana Vreeland would say, the eye has to travel. That's a huge part of creativity. I think for me now, I've kind of started loathing travel. And it has definitely impacted me creatively. Because when you do travel so much for work, I mean, listen, I would always take a vacation and turn it into a job because I'm that kind of girly. But I have to find my inspiration in different places now because mostly the joy that I get from traveling happens in my mind, less than somewhere that I have to utilize, Delta for.
So where are you getting that inspiration now, and how do you sort of empower your mind to drive that creativity?
I don't think I am.
Mm.
I don't think I am getting that inspiration right now. And I think that's okay. I think there's like different phases of time, you know? I used to put out 4 collections a year. Now I'm putting out like 1, maybe 2. And I'm sure like I'll go back to 4, I might do 6, I might only ever do 1, I might do none, right? I think for me it's just like I don't want to force it, and I don't think that you can force creativity. I think that my creativity is kind of manifested in a few different ways over the past few years. I've like but it has to be coming from a joyful place. So I have to like let it seep out in weird, unexpected places. And I
Yeah.
think it's happening with interior design. I think it's happening with interpersonal relationships. I think I found other ways to be creative that are a little less expected.
Yeah. So it's interesting because in some ways, when running a business, that can come across as maybe a little unstructured. And obviously, you're the creative director of your business, but you brought on a CEO and a team to run the day to day.
Yeah.
So, how do you kind of balance those two things, being able to, cultivate that creative flexibility while creating the structure that you need to run a successful business?
Well, bringing on a CEO didn't work for me, and it's interesting because Diane von Furstenberg was like, bringing on a CEO will never work for you. And I was like, you're wrong. And she was like, I don't think I am. But yeah, she was right. I think that, there's so many different kinds of businesses. And I think you have to keep in mind why you start a business. And for me, I started Brother Vellies because I was very interested in telling stories about culture, right? And to work with artisans that I felt like had been left out of the archives of fashion, whose work was just getting reappropriated. It wasn't because I wanted to like compete with Michael Kors. And so I think when you try to take a passion and turn it into a profit, sometimes that works really well and sometimes it doesn't. And I think you have to be honest about that. And so like, do I want to have Brother Vellies in the closets of every single woman in America? Yes. Like, do I want to take shelf space from Steve Madden? Absolutely. Do I want to see that business grow? Yes. But mostly because like, I want less shoes in the world that are made in sweatshops, more shoes in the world that are made by artisans, more shoes in the world that are made by women and people of color, and that have a cultural relationship to it and that help keep culture alive, right? Less than like because I want to have an IPO. So I think that part, like you have to really be in alignment with people about what a thing is,
Yeah, absolutely.
and yourself.
Completely. And so, to start, I talked about the fact that you were a very dynamic visionary.
Mm-hmm.
And in 2020, you decided to do something different. You launched your organization, the 15% Pledge, and you encourage retailers to dedicate more shelf space to Black owned brands.
Mm-hmm.
And it definitely was a departure from what you had been doing,
Mm-hmm.
but also something that, really ignited this other side of you and what was possible. Can you talk a little bit more about 15% Pledge and the impact that it's had?
Yeah, sure. So I never planned on launching a nonprofit. That idea that I had came when I was on the phone with a friend, and they were asking about a major retailer that they had a relationship with, and they had made a big donation, and I was like, it's not enough. And we just had this little bit of a moment where it was like, okay, what is enough? And I had to also ask myself that. And to be honest with you, I've been asking myself that for days because it was a pandemic. I was at home. People were like, are you coming out to March? I was like, no, I'm not. I really want to think of something else. Not that I don't find marching incredibly powerful and important, and that's a lot of how I got out my aggression in the first 4 years that preceded 2020. But yeah, I just had an idea. I really always believe that people should do the thing that they do best in service of communities that have been historically excluded, right? I think that's part of our duty with whatever gift we've been given on the planet. And so when that comes to major retailers, it was just a simple idea that, Black people are almost 15% of the population. Major retailers should commit 15% of their shelf space to Black-owned businesses. And I just typed it in the notes section of my phone, which I think we all do all the time, right? It's where good ideas are stored. And then the silly thing was screenshotting it and posting it on the internet. And I tagged, a bunch of retailers that I thought should commit to the idea.
Right.
I didn't double check it with all of my friends before it went out. I didn't, there was one friend that happened to stop by on his bike who was at my table at the gala last night because he was just like, I was like, do you think this is a good idea? And he was like, yeah, great.
It's interesting though, Aurora, because maybe the idea seems simple, but making it come to life the way you did is really complex. How did you navigate that? I mean, you had never created a nonprofit before. So what did that look like on the back
That's probably
end?
why I did it, right? It's like you do things because you don't realize how hard they are.
Yeah.
Well, I think it would have been really easy to just put the idea out there and have a bunch of people agree to the idea. And at that point, there were people who, listen, there were a lot of conflicting points of view at this time.
Right.
I mean, I had two very good friends tell me like that I absolutely should not do this as a nonprofit. I should only be consulting with people to get them to do it and all of that jazz. But I just felt like if I really wanted for these companies to actually try to do this, they were going to have to be held accountable to this after the march was over, And that meant that I would have to partner with them on that, And so that's why it became a nonprofit.
Yeah, but going even further, I mean, I don't think you just got lucky and this all came together the way that it did.
Uh-huh.
What do you think it is about you specifically that allowed you to assemble the right people and take the right steps to actually making this something really massive and really impactful?
I think it's a few things. I think passion is contagious. I think that I had spent already a long time like in the businessy, creative-y world, In 2019, Time Magazine named me like one of the optimists of the year. So I think there was already a general consensus that I was someone who believed in the good of the world and believed in the good of the country, even if I didn't always necessarily align with how it was presenting itself in different ways and times, And I think that people also understood that I was someone who appreciates capitalism but isn't necessarily that enamored by it, And so I think navigating that space between altruism and capitalism has always been really fascinating to me, and I think I really did that with Brother Vellies, And then I think in terms of that actual time, there were a lot of really tough conversations that happened. Like most of the people that took the pledge, it was phone calls with CEOs or founders really late at night on the phone. And I think to be honest with you, Nancy, also I'm not that interested in what people have done like, yes, I want to know, but I want to know that more so because it will help me figure out the best roadmap forward.
Right.
Like, I think that everyone's guilty, especially of racism, myself included, but ultimately the system's to blame. So how can we all work together at reconstructing a better system so that we have a better society? Because what I believe about people is that we want to be loved and give love more than anything else, and that bad things in the world come from fear. So as Pollyanna as it sounds, the more that we can do to inject love into our lives every day, including our business and the work that we do in our business, and the less we can be propelled by fear, the better off we will all be. And then ultimately, as a founder or as a CEO, it's like, what do you want your legacy to be? When do you want to be able to say, the world was falling apart, but I was brave on that day? There was a woman that I talked to on the phone for almost 2 years about taking the pledge, okay?
Wow.
And she said in the last call that we had, we got on the phone and I was expecting her to be like, okay, we can do it. Nancy, it's been 2 years. I've been talking to this woman, okay? And she started crying and she was like, I just can't do it.
Mhm.
And I was like, why? And she's like, I'm just so scared. And I'm like, what? And she's like, the 15%, like, I'm just so scared. I'm too afraid to fail. And I was looking at her and I was like, you already are failing. You're failing because you're too afraid to try.
Yeah, yeah. It's very powerful because, so much of the audience for Maker's Mindset are entrepreneurs, they're business people, they're, aspiring to do something great. And what you just described is where a lot of people get stuck.
Mm-hmm.
They let fear paralyze them. And when you don't take that first step, you're ultimately taking yourself out of the game, right? And so I think that that's a really, really important lesson. And I think that's why you've been so successful, whether in business or with your nonprofit, because you've been able to turn off that fear and let your passion and your vision be your compass.
I think my fear manifests in different ways. I think that my idea of success also manifests in different ways too, right? It's like someone said something to me the other day about a relationship that I had, and they're like, oh my God, like, I'm so sorry that didn't work out. And I was like, what do you mean? It worked out wonderfully.
Yeah.
Like I was with that person for 5 years and it was extraordinary 5 years. And then it started to get less extraordinary.
Right.
And we stopped it in a way where we could still be friends, So I think it was so successful.
Right. So it's really a matter of how you view circumstances, right?
Right.
Well, I want to pivot because last year you did something that a lot of people think about doing but don't have the courage to do. You
Hmm.
wrote your first book, Wildflower,
Mm.
which is a personal and empowering memoir of struggle and perseverance. And in the memoir, you talk about how you can actually harness grief and anger to create a positive outcome.
Mhm.
Can you talk about how you've done that both personally and professionally?
It's like sometimes things just suck. And we have to be okay with letting things also just suck, right?
Right.
Like, you don't have to make lemonade out of lemons. You could actually just let it rot in front of you, right? And by the way, in that rotting, the seeds will finally be there and they may give birth to something else. What would you rather have, a lemon tree or a glass of lemonade, right? So we all process things in a different way. I think I've processed things where I've been able to make lemonade. I think that I've also been befallen to grief before and had to wait a decade before those lemon seeds turned into a tree. But I think the most important part is just allowing things to pass through you in whichever way they need to, but remembering that it's temporary. And I think for me, I'm an extremely emotional person, extremely emotional. And I think I always have to center the fact that, like, how I feel right now will change. It will get both better and worse, but it will change. And I have to like let feelings sometimes just wash over me like the ocean and then recede and see how I feel later.
So, what advice would you give to entrepreneurs, people who are trying to make it, that are just overwhelmed by the setbacks and the challenge? What is that one piece of advice that you would give them to help them maintain that resilience that you just described?
Focusing on your privilege. Because even being born in this country is a privilege, right? Not being, in certain parts of the world right now, Congo, Gaza, wherever, privilege, right? So what do you have? What can you build with what you have? I think that social media is brutal because it forces us to do so much comparison. It's like, what is your life like if you don't compare it to other people? What are your relationships like if you don't compare those to other people? Comparison's a thief of joy, right? Like, if I just look at the parts of my life that like my therapist would probably say I need to work on, right?
Mhm.
If I just look at that, no shade, we love Brian, but like, if I just look at that and I'm like, okay, like, do I actually think that that part is broken or does it make me feel happy? I mean, I don't know. Obviously, I have like, there's some parts that need to be worked on. Let's be clear. But like, I don't know. I mean, yes, I suppose I could have more this or more that or, have kids or be married or whatever, but like maybe I'm great. Maybe I die tomorrow and this is just it. Why am I going to spend a big part of my day to day feeling like this isn't this isn't the most beautiful life ever?
Well, you've clearly done a lot to really cultivate this mindset that I think combined with you just being such a creative visionary has allowed you to do so, so much. But I want to talk just a little bit about you
Mm.
because I watch you on social media. We just had the gala recently, and here you are on my podcast. You are go, go, go. And so much of you being able to do what you do well is being able to show up as your best self as often as you can.
Mhm.
And I talk to a lot of people about the significance of creating rituals and modalities to help support that. Can you talk a little bit about some of the things that you do to keep yourself together?
Well, now I have an LED face mask from Shawnee Darden, okay? So like
Heard
there
about that.
I don't know. Wherever I can take a ritual, I'll do it. I think there's a few things that like are really important to me. I have a plant that has a new little bud growing on it, and every day I can notice a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of growth. And it kind of wraps around the side of my staircase. So like as I go up and down the staircase, like I look at it every time. And even when I have a bad day, I think like the plant's still growing. I think about the trees in my yard that were there before I was born that will probably be there after I die. I usually like look to nature for my rituals.
And what does that do for you?
It makes me understand my own lack of physical permanence in the world and like my own privilege of just getting to have nature around me, being able to like control when I go to bed at night and wake up in the morning. Like, yes, I have a job and a Zoom call, but like I have a lot of free will. And I think when I was younger, when I was a little kid and I talk a lot of in the book, especially in the early chapters about my childhood and dealing with physical and sexual abuse and I really felt quite stuck. And I remember I would like look up at the sky and just like pray for when I was able to have a little bit more personal autonomy. And I don't want to take that for granted. And I don't want to take like, I've earned a lot of different seats at different tables. And like, I don't want to just like sit at the table and like drink the wine and like, eat the like vegan chicken.
Mm-hmm.
I want to have conversations while there.
Right.
And I want to have different people at the table that I don't necessarily always agree with. Because honestly, that's where I've gotten some of the most progress happening.
Wow. Wow.
We have to have tough conversations.
Absolutely.
It's so important. Like, I need to talk to people that have very different points of view than I do. Otherwise, what the hell, like, how do you even know what your own perspective is?
Right. Exactly.
You're just like in your own algorithm. You're in your own explore page. Like, what? No. Ew, I hate that. I hate that.
Completely. So nature is a big thing for you in terms of
Yes.
how you reset and
Right.
all of that.
Yeah, I drink water. I get massages.
I love a good massage.
Me
Back
too.
massage or foot massage?
All of it. I
Yeah.
usually do like an hour and a half massages, sometimes 3 times a week.
Wow.
Yeah,
If I
because,
can get once a week, that is like solid.
well, it's forced time off the phone.
Mm-hmm.
And it's forced time where I just let my brain wander.
Right. You're kind of in this in-between state. You're not like quite sleeping and you're
Yes.
not totally awake. Yeah,
Yeah.
completely. Well, earlier you talked about this concept of legacy. And as we close out, I would love to know what your thoughts are for how you create legacy through the work that you're doing, both with your business, but also the activism work.
Hmm. Ugh, I hate to say this because I'm so tired. I really hate to say this. But I actually feel like I'm just getting started. So I don't know what my legacy will be, you know?
If you had a vision for what it could be, what would it look like?
More people getting to have privilege.
Mm-hmm.
Like more people getting to make decisions for themselves, More people feeling loved, more people feeling valued. I don't know what that looks like or how to get there.
Well, you have a vision, and sometimes that's all you need is to have that vision. I tell people that all the time. I feel like vision is, sort of like the GPS machine. You type in that address. You don't know how you're going to get there, but you trust that the system will take you there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that you're headed incredible places. I mean, you've already come so, so far. And I'm so, so excited for what's ahead, Aurora.
Oh, thank you, my love. It's so sweet of you.
And before we close out, we're just going to do something that is one of my favorite parts of all of this. It's
I'm ready.
called 5 Fire Facts. Are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Your go-to source of inspiration,
Books.
personal mantra or quote.
Whoa, I just had a horrible one pop into my mind, but I'm going to say it because it's rapid
Say
fire.
it.
Live fast, die young.
Okay.
But I think that, if anyone read my book, I went to jail for street racing. So I guess that it was like,
There you
whoa,
go.
17-year-old me back at you. Okay.
Exactly. Personal style icon. I really want to know this one.
Oof. Maybe the Himba women in Namibia.
Okay.
Very specific tribe.
Very specific.
Mage.
Nice. The best piece of advice you've received.
Diane von Furstenberg, man, she's really dropping bombs on you a lot of the time. She's always like, lean into what you're good at. Don't try to be things that you're not.
So important.
Yeah.
Favorite way to unwind? I think I know.
Massage.
Yeah, massage.
I'm a big podcast listener too, though.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh my God, yes. Give me a Michael Barbaro. Give me an Ezra Klein. Give them all to me, Yes.
When do you listen to podcasts?
Constantly. Almost as soon as I wake up.
Wow.
Yeah. I take in about 3 hours of podcasts a day, maybe 4.
That's incredible.
Constantly. I go to sleep listening to
I would have
podcasts if
never
I'm
guessed
sleeping
that.
alone. Yes, constantly.
Wow.
Constantly. Yeah.
Well, this was so much fun.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, it was wonderful. It's
So
a really nice
wonderful.
conversation.
For sure. So I absolutely loved my conversation with Aurora, and I want to just share a few of my key takeaways with you. So Aurora is such a creative visionary that when she talked about the fact that she doesn't always have all the creative ideas all the time and that it's okay for creativity to ebb and flow, I found it like something I just needed to hear, because the truth is sometimes we can get so caught up with trying to have all the answers at the right time, and we don't always do, especially when it comes to creative ideation and innovation. And I also thought it was really helpful, this idea of stepping outside of your day-to-day to really look around you and get inspiration outside of your work. And that's why I think, wellness and travel are so important, because the more that we can raise our heads up and see what's actually going on around us, the more that we can bring in those creative ideas and things that will really bring our truest innovation to the forefront. So Aurora really is a reminder that there is not a one-size-fits-all approach to running a business. And it's one of the reasons why I try to bring on all different sorts of guests that have just a different approach to running their business. Because the truth is, not everyone wants their business to become this huge thing that they eventually sell or IPO. Some people are totally okay with keeping their business small and maintaining that control. But I do think it's really important to be intentional about what it is you want. And in doing so, you can be realistic about your expectations. If you're going to keep your business small, it may mean that you won't be able to hire a big team or have a huge marketing budget. But if that's okay with you, then you're aligned with that expectation. Likewise, if you're trying to build something big, you should really understand what that's going to take. So I love that Aurora is just very honest about what it is she wants so that she can align her expectations accordingly. Aurora also reminds us that it's so easy to surround yourself with people who have the same thought process as you, right? Because it makes everything easier when it comes to a decision. Of course, you're going to win that conversation because everyone's thinking the same way you do. But if you really want to grow and you really want to challenge yourself, you should think about how you can surround yourself with people who do have different backgrounds and ideas and also are not afraid to challenge your thinking as the founder, because that's the way that you're going to get the best ideas and really think outside of the box. So those are just a few of the many key takeaways from my conversation with Aurora. I got so much out of our conversation, and I really hope that you did too. If you'd like to keep up with Aurora and her company, Brother Vellies, and her nonprofit, 15% Pledge, check out brothervellies.com and the15%pledge.org and follow Aurora on Instagram at Aurora James. And don't forget to subscribe to this series, leave a review, and share this episode with your community. And you can follow us at Makers Mindset Podcast on Instagram and at The Makers Mindset on TikTok and YouTube. You could also follow me directly at Nancy Twine on Instagram and read more from me at nancytwine.com. Let me know your thoughts, questions, and ideas for future Makers Mindset episodes. Thanks so much for tuning in.